When we think about homelessness, our minds usually jump to the most visible, final stages. But what if that whole journey actually starts long before someone ever spends a single night on the street? Today, we're diving deep into that unseen path, a journey that can shockingly begin before a person is even born.
So that's really the million-dollar question, isn't it? When does it start? Is it the moment someone loses a job? Or when they get that eviction notice? Well, what the research is telling us is that to really get a handle on this crisis, we need to rewind way, way back.
And the scale of this is just staggering. Every single year in the United States, as many as 2.5 million children experience homelessness. Let that sink in. That's 1 in every 30 kids. This isn't just an adult problem, it is a full-blown childhood crisis happening on a massive scale. So to find the real starting point, we have to go back. Like all the way back to the very beginning. Because the trauma, the instability of homelessness, it doesn't wait for a child to be born. It can start shaping a life from inside the womb.
The science on this is actually pretty incredible. Researchers have a term for it: toxic stress. Just try to imagine for a second the constant grinding anxiety a pregnant mother feels without a safe, stable home. That stress doesn't just impact her. It can literally, biologically, alter the brain development of her unborn child, setting them up for health problems that could follow them for their entire life.
And you can actually see the long-term cost in the data. This study from the journal Pediatrics is pretty jaw-dropping. For a young kid who's been homeless for more than 6 months, the odds of being in just fair or poor health are more than 3 times higher. These aren't just numbers on a chart. They represent a whole generation starting life with a much steeper hill to climb, which, by the way, carries a huge long-term cost for all of us. It's a stark reminder that when we're talking about a child's development, every single day of instability matters.
Okay, so we've seen how this can have a devastating impact on kids, basically creating this foundation of vulnerability before they even get a chance. But what about for adults? How does this cycle get started for them? Well, for so many, the direct line to losing their home starts with something terrifying: intimate partner violence. A landmark study out of California really shines a light on just how direct that link is. Get this, 17% of cisgender women who became homeless had experienced intimate partner violence in the 6 months right before they lost their housing. For them, violence wasn't just some background problem. It was the immediate trigger that literally pushed them out of their own home. And just think about the impossible, gut-wrenching choice this forces people to make. 1 out of every 5 survivors who had a rental subsidy, a safety net designed specifically to prevent homelessness, had to just walk away from it. Why? To get away from the violence. They were literally forced to choose between their physical safety and a roof over their head. This quote just makes it so painfully real. This isn't about bad financial planning or not trying hard enough. It's about survival, plain and simple. For this woman, and for countless others, the street became the only option they had to escape escalating violence. But tragically, escaping that violence at home, well, that's not the end of the nightmare. So often, it's just the beginning of a whole new chapter of vulnerability and danger out on the streets.
And this is where you can really see how broken the system often is. A whopping 60% of survivors who fled violence ended up unsheltered. That means sleeping outside, in cars, wherever they could. Now compare that to just 5%, who found a spot in a specialized domestic violence shelter. That is a massive, life-threatening gap between who needs help and what's actually available.
So, you're probably asking, why? Why don't more survivors get into those shelters? Well, the barriers are just immense. First off, there often just aren't enough beds, period. Some shelters have really strict rules. Maybe you can't bring an older son or a family pet. Others demand official police or medical reports as proof of abuse, which can be impossible or terrifying to get. And a lot of the time, people in the middle of a crisis just have no idea where to even look for help. And this quote, it just captures the absolute terror of that situation. You run from violence, only to be completely exposed and unprotected on the street, sometimes in the same neighborhood where your abuser can easily find you. It feels like there's no bridge to safety, nowhere to go. So, all of this leads to the next huge question. Once someone is caught in this cycle, why is it so ridiculously hard to find a way back into a stable home? The journey back to having a home isn't a straight road. It's more like this impossible climb, a really tough, step-by-step struggle with all kinds of obstacles, financial, bureaucratic, and emotional, blocking the way. And when you look at the data, those obstacles become crystal clear.
I mean, of course, the insane cost of housing is number one. That's a barrier for 95% of survivors. But it's not just about the money. Look at the other things. Imagine trying to make that climb with no family to call for help, with no case manager guiding you, all while you're dealing with bad credit or an eviction on your record.
And this is where it gets just cruelly ironic. The abuse itself is often what creates the very problems that prevent recovery. An abuser might intentionally ruin a survivor's credit, or the emergency escape might lead directly to an eviction. So the trauma they ran away from leaves this permanent administrative scar that can block them from ever finding a new home. It's a vicious cycle.
Okay, so understanding how deep and tangled these problems are is step one. Step two, figuring out how to fix it. And researchers are looking in some pretty interesting places for answers, from new public policies all the way to computer science.
Yep, you heard that right. Algorithms. The big idea here is to try and predict who is most at risk of becoming chronically or long-term homeless before they're stuck in the system for years. If you can do that, you can get resources to the people who need the most, and you can do it fast.
Then you'd think you'd need some super fancy AI from Silicon Valley to do this, right? Well, that's what's so cool. Researchers compare these complicated machine learning models with a ridiculously simple test. All it asks is this: did a person stay in a shelter for more than 75% of their first 3 months? The result was amazing. That simple question identified a group with almost identical needs to the one the complex algorithm found. It's a game-changing tool that any small nonprofit could start using tomorrow with just a basic spreadsheet. So beyond just prediction, what are the actual policy solutions? Well, the research points to a really clear 4-part strategy. It all starts with a house people first approach. That means giving people permanent housing without a bunch of preconditions, because you can't start to heal or rebuild your life if you don't have a safe place to sleep. Next, it's about empowerment. Flexible cash assistance that trusts survivors to know what they need, whether it's for a security deposit or a new phone to stay connected. That has to be backed up by making sure our healthcare and legal systems are trauma-informed, so getting help doesn't just create more trauma. And finally, and this one's huge, we simply have to expand the number of safe places for people to go.
Which brings us to our final thought. We have the data, we have the models, we have a pretty clear idea of what policies actually work. The tools to not just predict this crisis, but to actually prevent it are right there in front of us. The only real question left is, do we, as a society, have the collective will to use them?